Hey everyone, this is Jordan Ramirez, and welcome to my episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. I am here with my special guest, Mr. James Walter. It's good to see you.
Hey, Jordan, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, the film that James has spoke that film now the film that James has mentioned, or in this case, not mentioned, the film that James has brought up for this episode is the 1991 film Slacker, released in 1991, directed by the great Richard Linklater. And this film is a pretty interesting movie in that it is very dialogue driven. It is mostly about the lives of different individuals, and that I thought at first it was all connected, but I would ask you, maybe you could explain a little bit about when you saw this movie and how this movie became personal to you and why you chose this film for the episode.
Yeah, I think it really there are times in everyone's life where they are going through just exploring the world
Mm,
and just a lot of times for people that's maybe when they go into college and they've left their house, they can go see what the world's all about. And that's the time in my life when I experienced this film. It was probably around 1992 when
mm-hmm,
I didn't know about the film, but I was in college for photography
mm,
and had a lot of friends who were also in film school. And I was interested in still photography, not film, but movies were, everybody watches movies, right? So
mm-hmm,
my friend started talking about this movie that had come out a little while back, and the mythology around Slacker was that Richard Linklater was in film school when he came up with the idea for Slacker,
mm,
and he presented it to one of his instructors, and the instructor was like, "That's a really good idea. You should go shoot it." And so he did.
mm,
I don't know if that's how it really happened or not, but that's
mm,
how everyone around it and it sounded really kind of romanticized, like, oh well, wow, that if it could happen to him, then maybe it could happen to someone we know. And that's when my friends all got together, VHS tape, and we popped it in and watched Slacker. And I guess it was one of those where, like you said, you don't know what to expect when you see it, but the beautiful thing about it and the thing that everyone kept talking about was, yeah, this is one of those, it's not your typical film. Like you think it's going to start out with this character, and this character has a conversation
mm-hmm.
with someone, and then the camera follows the person they were talking to, and then it happens again and it happens again. It's like it's like pinball where the storyline just keeps shooting all over the place and doesn't really follow any one character. And that was kind of cool at the time because it was really different.
Mm-hmm. And it is a very non-linear story because it's very the point of view perspective is very omniscient. It follows whoever is the next person that we transition to. It's a neat segue. I thought was a pretty impressive technique on the part, and it's very natural. It's very natural. It's not like it was staged or I don't know. When I saw the film, it didn't feel like it was staged because almost all the random individuals in the film, they were just expressing themselves. They were just talking about whatever topic was on their mind, whether it was politics or pop culture, philosophy, physics, everyday life. It just was like anything that was on their mind. It was just like that was what I felt was so interesting about this film. And as you mentioned, there is not like a single character you follow. It's just different people who the camera follows. And it's a very dialogue driven film. It's very dialogue driven because normally when I would see a movie, it would be like half dialogue and half action. It's but the film when you watch it, it's more dialogue because the action is in the dialogue, which I thought was a pretty interesting way of showing this picture.
It is, and it's so dialogue driven, and you can tell if you study films, and you can tell that this film was done on a budget. Most of the scenes are shot outdoors, where you can you have lots of light. You don't have to bring a ton of light, maybe some reflectors, that kind of thing. There's
Mm,
one scene, I don't know if you noticed it, where you can actually see the boom microphone dip
mm,
into the top of the frame just a little bit.
mm,
And I think the the fact that they did not cut that and maybe reshoot it is brilliant, because it just the cult level status that this film has amongst certain people or amongst certain crowds is really cool. And there are so many people there. I mean, if you look at the list of the cast, it's a mile long, because there is no one central character. It just keeps shooting off into different directions. And so many of these cast members, I don't know if they were friends of the director, but they were definitely in Austin bands, a lot of California bands, and a lot
mm,
of musicians were in this film, just in small parts here
mm.
and there. But one thing you mentioned was just the variety of characters in this, and I would categorize them all as I would say misfits. Would you say that's pretty accurate? Like, definitely
Yeah.
not your run of the mill average suburban citizen, right?
Yes. I would definitely agree that they were misfits, and some of them were a little bit off the mainstream. Some of them were like some were oddballs, and some were like the overeducated college students, and some were the outcasts, which I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's a variety of different aspects of life, which I thought was pretty cool to watch all the way through.
Yeah, and the another piece of it is the entire film is set in Austin, Texas. And when
Hmm.
I watched it, I'd never been to Austin, Texas. I just heard it was they were big into music there, live music. And then as I got a little older, I went to Austin, Texas, and one of the things about Austin is keep Austin weird. So Austin's been known for being weird, and I found that to be true. One place I went, they were holding I think this was like in 2006, but there was this place I was doing a workshop, and they were holding at night the International Air Guitar Championships.
Hmm.
And I just thought, okay, air guitar, like how do you get that trophy, right? But
Yeah.
Austin was pretty weird. But it back in the, I guess, early '90s, late '80s, I guess Austin was really weird, and
Mm.
this film reflects that.
Yeah.
And through the characters, through dialogue, through people just coming up, and I think also the word that sticks out in my mind when I think of this film is random,
Mm.
because you come around the corner of to the next scene, and it's like, whoa, I did not expect that to
No.
happen. I didn't expect them to have that conversation. And you're
Mm.
right, it goes from really intellectual
Hmm.
to super like trippy. You don't know if they're on a little something
Hmm.
that they had before they got to that scene. Yeah, so
Yeah.
makes it special.
It does. I mean, watching it from that perspective, it's really cool to see that. But I did like the fact that I have seen his other movies. The few that I can think of were School of Rock was
Yeah.
with Jack Black. Then I saw Boyhood, and then I saw this other film, which was sort of the spiritual sequel to Dazed and Confused. Everybody Wants Some. I saw
Mm.
that at the Gasparilla Film Festival, and it does have a lot of the iconic dialogue driven lines. His films are always set in Austin, Texas, which is like his hometown. And he also likes to have characters who try to bring off a random topic that, as you say, it's sort of like it ping pongs from one individual to another, which I think is pretty much what I like about this particular film, and I think this director in general. I also thought that the film, as I was watching it, it was sort of like a neo-realist picture as I was watching it, because it felt so natural, and didn't feel it felt like the some of the locals in the picture, they were like real people, and not like actors you would just get from a theater workshop, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It seemed very gritty, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the appeal of it, because at that time, and I think at that time of life, when I was in college, I was what, like 19, 20, something. I was probably 19
Mm-hmm.
when I saw it. And that's the part of life where you want things to be real, and you want things to be, and looking at that film, you're like, okay, I could see filming something like that. I could see being part of something like that. It didn't look so glossy. There weren't CGI effects. It really brought you into the story as a person who wanted to be just entertained by a great story. And so that was another part of the appeal, that it wasn't so glossy, it wasn't polished,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt at that time in life really accessible.
Yeah. I mean, watching that film, it does feel like it doesn't have that gloss or that beauty that I think is what I thought was enjoyable. Because what I did notice as I watched the film Slacker was that you do see some portions of it that are, the weird aspect, and then there are some parts that are not so beautiful or weird, but it's just like the decrepit, or it's just a little bit broken. But that's what Austin is. You have to see who these people are, because in the film you're not just seeing like the weird people, you're also seeing people that could be a little bit off the a little bit off to the side, a little
Yeah.
bit off the rocker. But I
Yeah.
think that's what I like about watching this film, because you have to see who some of these people are. You can't just focus on individuals that you just want to look that you want to focus on. You have to focus on the people who you might want to look away, but you can't, because it's what you have to notice about this little town about Austin, Texas, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I know other people have probably picked up on this, if they haven't watched the film and they're listening to us just talk about how kind of random it is. But I think that's one of the other big appeals, is if you watch a lot of movies, if you study story, if you study how to put together stories, it's a little tough to enjoy movies sometimes, because
Mm-hmm.
you kind of know what's going to happen. You can see the structure, like the three-act structure. This film does none of that.
Mm-mm.
It has none of that. You don't go in saying, okay, there's the hero, and they're probably going to get into some weird
Mm-mm.
stuff, and then they're going to triumph. And that is not this film. And so that's probably another level of the appeal. Now, I have heard some people, and I've had this experience too, because I've seen the film a few times. And as I've watched the film later in life,
Mm-hmm.
not with that wide-eyed enthusiasm for all things different,
Mm-hmm.
I it's sort of at the end, I was like, okay, let's wrap it up. Let's get this thing done. I remember how great it was, but at the same time, I was like, okay, maybe I do want that three-act structure a little bit more right now. Uh, but no,
Yeah.
the film still holds up, 30 some years later. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, in fact, here where I live, there's an art museum, and they will host celebrities. Like if musicians or actors or people are in town doing stuff, they'll invite them to come host a movie night. And it's outdoors, typically during the summer. And they will pick their favorite film, like something that was really instrumental in their
Mm-hmm.
creative development.
Yeah.
And they will explain that on stage. Then everyone gets to watch the movie. And I remember it was about 6, 7 years ago, the lead singer for Death Cab for Cutie,
Mm-hmm.
not sure of his name off the top of my head right now, but he came to that event. He explained why Slacker was one of the foundational films that really got him inspired to, I don't know if it was to write some of his music or just to, creatively in general, because creative energy moves in so many different ways and so many different directions. So if you're a musician, you can definitely get inspiration from things that are visual, or uh, things that are story driven.
Mm-hmm.
And he really called out that film as giving him almost permission to just kind of be random with things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I felt as well. Like things don't have to totally make sense and be wrapped up with a bow at the end to be good. And this film pretty much proves that to
Yeah,
me.
it yes. Because when as I was watching the film, it felt like uh it didn't feel like it was one connected story. It was more like interwoven stories. It reminded me, I know I haven't seen this film, but I might have heard of this film. It felt like I don't know if there I don't know if anyone else has seen this film, but it feels obscure when I pull this up. uh I think it was like 32 short films by Glenn Gould or something like that, where it's like an anthology, but it doesn't focus mostly on the central character. It focuses on different people, and it's like little mini short films. But I thought that's what it felt like when I was watching it all the way through. But I do enjoy it overall. So were there any other connections that you made as you watched this film that you could relate to as part of like the aspect, whether it is the direction of how the camera was filming it, or how you get to see the scenes, how they were photographed, or anything that mostly appealed to you when you saw this film?
Yeah, I think, well, there were a couple of things. There was a lot of current pop culture reference in the film that would have been relevant in 1990. So, referencing things that had just happened maybe a few years before, but there were also things that happened years and years before that my generation wasn't really connected to, but I heard the generation before me talk
Mm-hmm.
about. And so that was pretty cool. But also with when you're talking about camera movements and bringing the audience into the story visually, yeah, it felt like there was a lot of first person point of view with the
Mm-hmm.
camera work.
Yeah.
And that just kind of the way it followed people in some ways, and the way it didn't necessarily make the people in the story the heroes like you're used to. It kind of followed them in a way that you felt like you were there and you were the camera and you were seeing some of this happen. Now, a lot of the blocking, a lot of the camera work did feel pretty traditional in some cases, but in other cases, it kind of moved in a way that kept you really engaged and wanting to see what was about to happen next because you knew you were going to follow along and be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was pretty interesting to go from Richard Linklater just getting off the bus and talking about his dreams with the taxi driver, to the last shot of the individual camera people just filming. And then it ends with the camera people just filming themselves like little home movies, like 60 millimeter type films, and having to just have music in the background because the movie didn't have a lot of like an orchestral score. It was more like it was a silent score. It was the sound was more like it was natural, and the
Hmm.
music that you would hear mostly came from like car radios, or it would come from the television set, or it would come from a band that was playing in the movie, and that was all you heard. Which I thought was pretty impressive. And then when you get to the last shot, then it becomes like the music is back, but it's like the background music. And
Yeah.
it's just for that one last sequence of these individual camera people just, filming themselves and then going off to, I think it was like a national park they went to where they filmed that last scene. And it just felt like it was impressive to go from like a dialogue scene to almost like a silent sequence, which I thought was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I looked up a little bit of trivia for this movie, for this conversation. And one of the things that I thought was super interesting, I didn't think about it much until I read this fact, but it says the average movie has anywhere from 500 to 1,000 cuts in the
Mm,
editing.
mm,
And this whole movie,
mm-hmm,
90 some minutes of this movie, it only has 163 cuts.
mm,
And almost a third of those come in the last 5 minutes when they were doing the Super 8 scene that
mm-hmm.
you just mentioned. And so it's that's pretty impressive because it says a couple of things like they were really intentional about
Mm-hmm.
how they move the camera did the scenes, and this each scene was fairly long. I mean,
Mm,
when you're talking about movies where they cut every couple of seconds
mm-hmm.
in in most cases, but for this one, they held the camera pretty much where they were on the scene. Then if you were going to the next scene, you were probably either going to or in a different place.
Mm.
And that's just kind of a testament to the style of storytelling because it was a little slower pace, but you didn't feel it. It didn't weigh on you exactly because you didn't feel like it had to snap from one scene to the next because, like you said, it's so dialogue driven that
Mm.
you were just interested. You were half interested in, oh my gosh, what are they going to say next? And also processing what did I just hear? That was pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, some of the scenes where, okay, I'll take one sequence that I remembered seeing. There's this one guy, he just arrived inside a diner, and there's this woman, she keeps repeating the same thing that she says. And then there's another guy, he's saying, like, don't look at me, don't look at me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a guy who's wearing like a bathrobe, and then she's like, I you do not engage in sexual intercourse or whatever she
Right.
said. Yeah. And then it was like, is this woman like a doctor, or is she saying this because there's something wrong with her?
And
uh
she was kind of rocking back and forth a little bit. I'm remembering the scene now, and it's been a while since I've seen the film, but yeah, she was definitely in her own little world in
mhm.
this diner, and yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was just
yeah. It's like one of those moments where I was like, okay, I did not expect to see that, but um, there's moments like that. There's that sequence, then there's the sequence. Originally, this is like after Richard Linklater leaves the taxi, and there's a man who ran over his own mother, and he builds these little candles that he's memorializing, and then he has his little home movies, and he's playing on a projector, and then he gets arrested after that. And it's like those little moments. I didn't expect that, or I didn't know what was going on, because it's like, uh, okay, what's happening?
yeah. I
Those
mean,
types, yeah.
there was such attention to detail of what was going on in the periphery, and
Mm-hmm.
I know I'll catch flack for this, but it feels a little Fellini-esque
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many unique and just weird things that are going on, like that lady who was at the diner. She was at the counter. She was sort of rocking back and forth and just adamant that I forgot exactly what she was saying, but you were right. It's
Yeah.
something about she was not going to have, sexual intercourse with something. I forgot
I
what the
think
thing
she also
was.
said she was like a medical nurse or something like that.
Yeah,
She was
yeah.
like,
She said, "I am a doctor. I should know. I'm a doctor. I am a medical doctor, and I should
yeah,
know." Yes.
yeah,
And
but yeah, those types of tidbits and moments. And then there was another sequence where the guy was trying to rob this older man's house, and he said, "Oh, you won't find anything there." And he kept talking about how Leon Chagall, who murdered William McKinley, and then he talked about like this sort of anarchist stuff, and it's like, okay, it's pretty, I don't know, interesting to hear this guy's perspective. And he's
yeah,
talking to this guy who was trying to rob the place, but there was nothing for him to find anyway, which I thought was okay. It's pretty interesting.
yeah,
But yeah, it's a very interesting movie. And also the other sequence about the guy who was following him, and then he spread all these, and then he was talking about, how in the 60s, when NASA was sending man over to the moon, we've been in the moon for like the 1960s. We've been on Mars since the 50s. And all this is all media manipulated, all that stuff that he was talking about in that one sequence. And it was like, I don't know how long it was. I think it was like 3, 4, 5 minutes long, that entire sequence with him just talking
I-
about how man actually was on the moon, and this was whole involvement between the US and Russia and all that stuff, which I thought it was pretty interesting. Just to go
yeah.
on and on about all these types of individuals and whatever they say. I'm like, it's a pretty interesting movie, whatever these characters have to say.
Yeah, you go from the guy that runs over his mom and then comes back to light the candles at he's got a little shrine there to I'm not sure what, but
Mm,
then you go to the conspiracy theorist, and
hmm.
then you go all the way to the the lady who is just wild and crazy and trying to talking about this guy who shot himself in traffic, and then she wants to sell somebody a Madonna pap smear, and he's
Yeah,
like, hey,
yeah.
$50, I got it right here, scored it from my friend. And you're like, what, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it,
yeah, I mean it's very wild. It's like a wild movie to experience because whenever you see these types of individuals and whatever they say, it's almost like, okay, it's out in the open, but whatever they say, it's whatever's on their mind. And I sometimes I find it interesting, sometimes I find it a little bit weird, and sometimes I find it a little bit I don't know
yeah,
how that person went there, but okay. Or it's
right.
like something personal, like there's this one scene where these three guys are throwing the tent and the typewriter because one of the guys said, "Oh, it's because of that girl that we once knew. She screwed you over. She screwed me over, and the next thing she's gonna screw you over."
Mhm.
Which I thought was pretty interesting to go from weird to a little bit off kilter to something personal. I thought was a pretty interesting eclectic array of whatever each of these characters were saying, and I thought, this is almost like a personal film uh that isn't just focused on one weird diatribe or another. It just focused on something that felt either it was personal or it was emotional.
Yeah, that's a really good point because it does do a good job of being just wild and crazy at some points, but not completely ridiculous all the time. So it does come back and grounds you a little bit, and then it moves on to something that just expands your mind and like, how did they connect those dots? That was some pretty good writing. So yeah, I
Hmm.
agree definitely.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely good writing. Also, wonderful direction and also wonderful acting by you mentioned like some friends of the director and local actors from Austin, Texas, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I read that you were a photographer and you also have your own podcast called The Joyful Rebellion. So can you describe in detail what the podcast is about so maybe my listeners and viewers could get to know what this is?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I started a Joyful Rebellion a little over a year ago, and it's because I talk to people a lot who are maybe hitting that point in their life where they've done all the things that they were told they were supposed to do to be successful. They went to the schools, they got the job, they started the family, they bought the house. They did all the things we're told growing up. Hey, you do these things and you're going to be happy. And then they look around and they're like, wow, there's it's got to get more interesting than this, right? And so when they hit that point in life and they start exploring, okay, so what do I do to bring more life into their life?
Mm.
And so that's what I talk to people on the podcast about, either the journey that they personally went through. Either they hit a wall, or they hit a point in their life where they realize, gosh, there's got to be more than this. Stories are really inspiring. And sometimes I talk with people who are in the kind of job where they can help people make that breakthrough. So, for example, I just interviewed a lady. She's a ghostwriter,
Mm.
and she doesn't write about ghosts. She kind of is the ghost. She's the person who, if you have a story that you want to tell, and I talk to so many people, they say, I want to write a book. I've got this great story. People tell me I should write a book, and then they never get around to it, and so they die with that book or that story inside of them where people could have enjoyed it or learned something maybe. And so I talked to this lady Maggie. She helps people do that. So she interviews them, gets their story, and then she writes all the words. She does all the heavy lifting, the hard work, and then she puts that person's name, who it's their story,
Mm-hmm.
and she puts their name on the book. And so that's just one example of someone who might help someone get more fulfillment out of,
Mm-hmm.
like, by getting that story out there, connecting with more people. And otherwise, maybe they either had hesitations or didn't think they could do it. There are a lot of ways to do the things that we really want to do, but maybe are afraid to do. And so that's what the podcast is all about, is about bringing that to light, bringing lots of different options and points of view and
Mm.
perspectives to people who might be looking for them.
Oh yeah, that's well, thank you for sharing Joyful Rebellion. Maybe so where can my listeners and viewers find a Joyful Rebellion if they want to subscribe to the podcast?
Yeah, it's on all the podcast platforms, the Apple, the Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, it's everywhere there. You can also go to ajoyfulrebellion.com, and that's the main site. It's got all of the episodes, and it will also connect you to Apple, Spotify, all those different platforms, whichever one you use.
Okay, thank you so much, and it's a wonderful plugin.
Yeah.
So, so do you have any recommendations that are similar to the movie Slacker that maybe my audience could say is similar to the movie in the structure or form?
Oh wow. Okay. I would say another. Okay, so this is maybe a little similar in structure, far less dialogue, but I
Mm-hmm.
love Eight and a Half by Fellini.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful film by Federico Fellini. Yes. Okay, so Fellini's Eight and a Half from '63, starring Marcello Mastroianni, and I actually saw this film, and it's a really beautifully well-made film. A lot of dialogue, not a lot of dialogue, but a lot of
Yeah,
spectacular dreams and flashbacks, and some really interesting imagery that I think is similar to what Linklater maybe used in his other pictures. But I think Linklater, I don't know if he said this in an interview. I think he said he was influenced by Fellini, maybe not.
okay.
Yeah, because I believe he said that he loved his storytelling and he loved the way that he moved his camera so beautifully and eloquently. And
Yeah.
also because I imagined he also had like some sort of neo-realistic aspect when it came to the characters and how the situations were filmed, and also just taking some ideas from Fellini in your film doesn't really hurt that much. I think it makes it a little bit of your own style, which is what I noticed in his films.
Yeah, and if I could just expand on the fact, so if someone watches Slacker, then they watch Eight and a Half, they're going to think, wow, how do those even relate? But as a visual person, as a visual creative person, I think Fellini did with visuals
Mm-hmm.
what Linklater did with dialogue
Mm.
in each of those movies. So Fellini painted the picture and told the story with his camera movements and it's another film that's pretty random. I mean, it's not quite going from one to the other like Slacker does, but it doesn't end up where you think it will.
Mm.
So I think in that way they're fairly similar in that creative energy.
Mm. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it is a great recommendation. Okay, so before we end the podcast, do you have any last words, or do you have any last statements about this film before we end our podcast?
I well, if anyone's interested in watching the film, I would love to know what their thoughts are. So if they want to put anything in the comments, I'll be checking out the comments for your show, or get in touch with one of us and say, hey, what did you think of this? And I'm always interested in getting new to someone art out
Mm.
to people who haven't experienced it yet. So watch the film and enjoy.
Okay. And where can my viewers and listeners look up your work if they want to learn more about you?
The best place is on Instagram at therealjameswalters.com or at Instagram, I guess is the handle there. So
Yeah.
Real James Walters.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and it was a great film that I thought was pretty interesting to watch and a great recommendation. And I hope to look forward to seeing you in the future. Maybe next time we'll meet.
Yes, I hope so, Jordan. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you, James Walt. Thank you, James, for being on the show. This is Jordan Ramirez signing off, and you have been watching Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, talking with my special guest, James Walter. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I hope we'll meet again in the future.
Hope so. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much.